In 1908, a young journalist got a rare assignment: interview one of the wealthiest men alive, the steel magnate Andrew Carnegie. That interview was supposed to last 3 hours. It turned into 3 days, and by the end of it, Carnegie made the journalist an offer: spend next 20 years of your life interviewing the most successful people in America, unpaid, and figure out what actually separates from them everyone else. That journalist was Napoleon Hill, and the book that came out of those 2 decades of research became one of the best-selling self-help books ever written, Think and Grow Rich. Now, I wanted to be upfront with you before we dive in. This book was written in 1937. Some of its language is dated, and a few of its more mystical claims about true vibrations haven't aged well under modern scrutiny. But underneath the antique language is something that a huge number of later, more rigorous books of psychology and success actually discovered independently. The idea that clarity of desire, focused persistence, and belief in your own capability are not just nice feelings. They are functional tools that change what we notice, what you attempt, and what you are willing to endure. By the end of this episode, you will understand the core system Hill extracted from studying hundreds of high achievers, which parts of it are genuinely useful today, and how to apply the parts that hold up without buying into the parts that don't. Hill was not a psychologist or a scientist in the modern sense. He was just a journalist and researcher who spent roughly 2 decades interviewing self-made successful people, industrialists, inventors, financiers, trying to reverse engineer a repeatable pattern from their lives. He was not running controlled experiments. He was doing something closer to qualitative patterns spotting across an enormous number of case studies, decades before that kind of research became formalized. The result is a book that reads less as scientific paper and more like a distilled operating manual built from observation rather than laboratory data. That's worth knowing going in, because it explains both the book's strengths, vivid, memorable, history-driven lessons, and its weaknesses, like the occasional claim that would need real evidence to hold up by today's standards. What's genuinely impressive, though, is how much of Hill's core framework anticipates ideas that modern psychology later validated with actual research: the power of specific, written goals, the role of persistence over raw talent, the importance of surrounding yourself with the right people. He got there first, just with a different toolkit and a different kind of proof. He's empathetic that virtue ambition does not produce results. Wanting to be successful someday is functionally useless because it gives you nothing concrete to aim at, plan around, or measure progress against. What he prescribes instead is a fairly specific exercise. Write down exactly what you want, attach a specific deadline to it, decide what you are willing to give in exchange for it, and read that written statement to yourself daily. This may sound almost too simple, but there is a real psychological mechanism underneath it that later research on goal setting confirmed decades after this book was published. Specific, written goals with deadlines consistently outperform virtue intentions, partly because specificity forces your brain to generate a concrete plan rather than staying in the comfortable fudge of someday. Vagueness feels safe because it never has to be tested against reality. A specific, dated goal can actually be missed, and that discomfort is part of what makes it effective. Hill also draws a distinction that's easy to gloss over. A wish and a burning desire are not the same intensity of thing at all. Almost everyone wishes for more money or more success in some passive way. Very few people convert that wish into an obsession they organize their actual daily behavior around. The people he studied across the board had crossed that threshold. The desire was not a background feeling. It was the organizing force behind how they spent their time. Hill argues that faith, a genuine, felt belief that your goal is achievable, is a mental state that can be deliberately cultivated, not something you either have or don't. His tool for building it is autosuggestion, the repeated, deliberate feeding of your own subconscious mind with the thoughts, images, and emotional conviction. You want it to become automatic rather than leaving that mental territory to chance or default negativity. Strip away the era-specific, and what's being described is close to what modern psychology calls self-efficacy. Your internal belief about your own capability to execute a specific task successfully. And as self-efficiency is not just a nice-to-have feeling, it's been shown repeatedly to influence actual behavior, because people who believe an outcome is achievable tend to try harder, persist longer through setbacks, and interpret failure as information rather than proof of inadequacy. People with low self-efficiency on a task tend to give up faster at the first sign of difficulty, which becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy regardless of their actually underlying ability. Hill's specific technique, repeating written or spoken affirmations while visualizing the desired outcome is as already achieved as a mixed repetition today, and it is fair to be skeptical of the more mystical claims attached into the original text, but the underlying mechanism, deliberately directing repeated attention toward a goal and rehearsing success mentally before attempting it, overlaps meaningfully with techniques used in modern sports psychology and cognitive behavioral approaches, where mental rehearsal has demonstrated real effects on performance and confidence. The packaging stated, the core mechanism has some legitimate backing. Hill draws a sharp distinction between general knowledge and specialized knowledge. General knowledge, he argues, has a very little direct value toward achieving a specific goal, no matter how much of it you accumulate, because it's not organized toward any particular purpose. Specialized knowledge, narrow, applied, and specifically relevant to the exact outcome you are pursuing, is what actually converts into results, and crucially, it does not have to live entirely inside your own head. This leads to one of the more practical pieces of advice in the book. You don't need to personally know everything required to achieve your goal. You need either the specialized knowledge yourself or reliable access to people who have it. Many of successful people Hill studied were not the most formally educated people in their field. They were skilled at identifying, organizing, and directing the specialized knowledge of others toward a shared objective. That insight that leadership and access to expertise can substitute for personal expertise was ahead of its time and remains genuinely relevant in how modern teams and organizations actually function. On imagination, Hill argues that every achievement starts a mental construction before it becomes a physical reality. Nothing gets built in the world that was not first built, at least in rough form, someone's mind. He separates imagination into two modes: synthetic imagination, which recombines existing ideas, facts, and concepts in a new arrangements, and creative imagination, which he associates with flashes and genuinely novel insight. Most practical, useful ideas in his framing come from the synthetic mood, taking things that already exist and connecting them in the ways nobody had connected before, rather than inventing something from nothing. On planning, is insistent that desire alone accomplishes nothing without an organized, practical plan translating into an action, and critically, he expects plans to fail and require vision, sometimes repeatedly. A plan that doesn't work is not proof the goal is unreachable. It's simply information that the current plan needs to be replaced with better one. This reframing, treating failed plans as a data rather than verdicts, shows up constantly through the book as a core survival trait among the people he studied. On decision, Hill makes an observation from his interviews that I find genuinely striking. The successful people he studied tended to reach decisions quickly and firmly, and change their minds slowly and only when genuinely warranted, while people who struggled to achieve their goals tended to do the opposite, deciding slowly and hesitantly, then reversing those decisions quickly under pressure or criticism from others. Indecision, in his analysis, was not a neural self-default, it was an active drain on momentum and a habit that left unchecked, bled into every other area of the person's life. He describes persistence as being built from a combination of clear purpose, self-belief, a specific plan, accurate knowledge, cooperation from others, willpower, and habit, and notably, he frames it as a trainable rather than fixed, something you can deliberately strengthen the same way you would train a muscle, largely through repetition and by protecting yourself from what he calls closed mind, of relentless negative influence from other people. There's a memorable story in this section about a man who mined for gold, ran out of luck just a few feet short of a massive vein of ore, gave up and sold his equipment for scrap, only for the buyer to hire a mining engineer, do the math, and strike an enormous fortune just a few feet past where the original owner had quit. Hill uses that story to make a point that echoes something we have discussed on this podcast before. In our episode on atomic habits, progress is often invisible right up until right before the breakthrough, and quitting at exactly the wrong moment is one of the most common, most invisible causes of failure. You often can't tell in advance whether you are 3 feet from the goal or 300 miles from it, which is exactly why persistence has to be treated as a decision, not a feeling you wait to arrive naturally. Hill calls in the mastermind principle the coordination of knowledge and effort between two or more people working toward a shared definite purpose in a spirit of genuine harmony. His claim is bold that this kind of aligned group effort produces a combined mental capacity greater than the simple sum of the individuals involved, almost as though the group itself becomes a kind of additional mind, whether or not you buy the more mystical framing of that claim. The practical version holds up extremely well under modern scrutiny. Surrounding yourself deliberately with a small group of capable, aligned people meeting regularly with a shared purpose genuinely does produce better outcomes than trying to achieve significant goals in total isolation, both because of the built expertise and because of the accountability and moral that group provides. This is essentially the intellectual ancestor of modern mastermind groups, accountability partnerships, and advisory boards. Hill just got there roughly 90 years before those become common business vocabulary. He describes 6 basic fears he observed recurring across nearly everyone he interviewed as an obstacle they had to conscientiously overcome: the fear of poverty, the fear of criticism, the fear of ill health, the fear of loss of love, the fear of old age, and the fear of death. His argument is not that successful people don't experience these fears. It's that they don't let those fears go unexamined and unmanaged, running quietly in the background and shaping decisions by default. Particularly, worth highlighting is his treatment of the fear of criticism, because he urges it's one of the most universally underestimated of the 6. A huge number of people, in his observation, quietly shape their entire lives around avoiding the disapproval of others, never starting the business, never asking questions, never pursuing the unconventional path, purely to avoid being criticized, often by the people whose opinion ultimately don't matter much to their actual life outcomes. This maps closely onto what modern psychology would later describe under labels like social evaluation anxiety, and it remains one of the more universally relatable obstacles in the entire book, even for readers today who have never heard Napoleon Hill. The emphasis on specific, written, deadline-bound goals over virtue-wishing, strongly supported by later goal-setting research. That idea that self-belief functionally shapes effort and persistence, closely related to the modern, well-supported concept of self-efficiency, the distinction between general and specialized knowledge, and the idea that access to expertise can substitute for personally possessing it, the treatment of persistence as a trainable rather than fixed, and the mastermind principle, which anticipates decades of later research on the real performance benefits of aligned small group. What needs a skeptical eye? Some of the book's claims about though it itself having a lateral magnetic or vibrational power to attract outcomes into physical reality go well beyond anything modern science can support, and should not be taken literally. The book was also written in and reflects the assumption of a very different era, and some of its examples and framing have not aged gracefully. The honest way to read this book today is an early, intuition-driven map of psychological principles that later, more rigorous research independently discovered useful for the map, not for the mysticism layered on the top of it. Let's make this concrete. Say you wanted to start a business on the side of your current job. Start with desire. Write down exactly what the business relates, what revenue target you are aiming for, and a specific date, not the same day, an actual date on the calendar. Apply specialized knowledge. Identify the 2 or 3 things you genuinely don't know how to do yet. Bookkeeping, marketing, whatever it is, and either learn the minimum needed for find someone who already has the expertise rather than trying to become an expert in everything yourself. Apply organized planning and decisions. Sketch a plan, expect it to be wrong in places, and commit to revising quickly rather than either abandoning the goal or refusing to adjust the plan. Apply persistence. Decide in advance what obstacles are likely to make you want to quit and commit to pushing through the first several, since Hill's gold mine story is a useful reminder that you are rarely know how close you are to breakthrough in the moment. Apply the mastermind principle. Find 2 or 3 other people, not necessarily in the same business, who are also building something, and meet with them regularly for the honest feedback and accountability. That's the entire system translated into one modern, realistic scenario with era-specific mysticism left out and a functional psychology kept in. If this episode helped you separate the timeless psychology in the book from the dated mysticism around it, share it with someone who dismissed this book after hearing only the more mystical parts. There is a genuinely useful system hiding underneath the era-specific language. Subscribe for more next books.